I am Cassidy, 32 years old, and my arrogant husband thought he had left me with absolutely nothing. He handed me a brutal divorce settlement and laughed in my face. But everything changed when I boarded a flight back to New York and saved an elderly man who was choking on his airplane meal. I had no idea this frail stranger was a legendary law professor. More importantly, I did not know he had the power to destroy my husband entirely. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe karma always finds a way to punish the greedy. The drama started on a Tuesday morning flight from Chicago to New York. I sat in my first class, a rare luxury I booked, using the last of my frequent flyer miles. My hands gripped the armrests as I mentally prepared for the worst day of my life. Beside me sat an older gentleman reading a thick legal manuscript. He was quiet and polite. The flight attendant served our meals about an hour into the flight. The man took a bite of his food and suddenly grabbed his throat. His face turned an alarming shade of red. He started gasping for air. The flight attendant dropped her tray. Passengers around us began to scream. Panic erupted across the cabin. Someone shouted for a doctor. I did not freeze. I did not scream. My mind snapped into sharp focus. I recognized the symptoms instantly. Severe anaphylactic shock. Muscle memory took over immediately. For years I had cared for my late father who suffered from severe allergies. I knew exactly what a body looked like when it was shutting down from a hidden allergen. I reached into my purse and grabbed the emergency auto-injector I still carried out of habit. I ripped off the safety cap. I leaned over and drove the needle firmly into the outer side of the old man, his thigh. I held it there for 10 seconds. The man gasped loudly as the medicine rushed into his system. His airway began to open. By the time the flight crew rushed over with an emergency medical kit, his breathing had stabilized. The color slowly returned to his face. He leaned back against his seat, exhausted but alive. The flight attendants thanked me profusely. They offered me extra pillows and free drinks, treating me like a hero. I just waved them away. I sat back down in my seat and smoothed out the wrinkles in my cheap blazer. The old man took several deep breaths before turning his head to look at me. His eyes were sharp and incredibly bright. "Thank you," he said, his voice raspy but steady. "You acted faster than anyone else. Most people would have panicked. You did not even flinch. Why are you so incredibly calm?" I looked down at my worn-out shoes. I let out a bitter laugh. I turned to look at him. "Saving a life at 30,000 feet is easy." "Professor," I said, noticing the academic title on the manuscript he had been reading. "The hard part is the divorce hearing I have in exactly 2 hours." He raised an eyebrow, silently asking me to continue. "My husband is a corporate lawyer," I explained, keeping my voice steady. "A very ambitious and incredibly arrogant corporate lawyer. In exactly 2 hours, he is going to stand in a courtroom and argue that my 5 years of sacrificing my forensic accounting career to support his ambitions is legally worth $0. The old man listened intently. I had spent the last 5 years of my life playing the perfect supportive wife. I put my own dreams on hold so he could climb the corporate ladder. I managed our home-hosted dinners for his partners and smiled through his endless late-night meetings. And how did he repay my extreme loyalty? He filed for divorce and handed me a settlement that would leave me with practically nothing. He assumes I will just sign the papers and disappear. He thinks my accounting skills are too rusty to fight back against his expensive legal team. The old man sat up slightly straighter. He introduced himself as Winston Caldwell. He did not say much about his own career, but he possessed an undeniable air of authority. He asked me a few pointed questions about my husband and his legal firm. I answered them honestly, pouring out the frustration I had been carrying for months. Winston nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression resting on his face. "You have a sharp mind," Cassidy Winston told me, as the plane began its final descent into New York. "Forensic accounting requires a brilliant eye for detail. Do not let anyone convince you that your skills have lost their value. Your husband might know the law, but you know how to read the numbers. Numbers do not lie." I thanked him for his kind words, assuming he was just a nice old man trying to comfort a stressed passenger. I had absolutely no idea who Winston Caldwell truly was. I had no idea that this frail gentleman held the ultimate key to my revenge. As the airplane wheels touched down on the runway, I took a deep breath. I gathered my bags and prepared to face the man who had broken my heart and stolen my future. I adjusted my jacket again and checked my phone one last time. But for the first time in months, I did not feel entirely alone. I felt a sudden surge of pure confidence filling my chest. The universe had placed Winston next to me for a reason, and my husband was about to learn that you should never underestimate a woman who knows exactly how to settle a score. He thought I was weak. I thought I was finished. He was completely and entirely wrong about my power. We stepped off the airplane into the bustling terminal of John F. Kennedy Airport. The adrenaline from the medical emergency had faded completely, leaving me with the stark reality of my impending courtroom battle. I checked my wristwatch. Time was slipping away faster than I wanted to admit. Navigating the chaotic baggage claim and finding a taxi would easily consume an hour I simply did not have. I mentally calculated the absolute fastest route to the Manhattan courthouse, bracing myself for a frantic sprint through the crowded city. Winston stopped walking and immediately turned to face me. His posture was perfectly straight, showing no lingering signs of the near-fatal crisis he had just endured. He signaled to a man in a dark suit standing near the terminal exit. "My personal driver is waiting right outside," Winston said smoothly. "The traffic into the city is brutal today, and you have exactly 90 minutes to face your husband. I insist you share my car. It is the absolute least I can do for the brilliant woman who saved my life." I wanted to decline politely, but the sheer panic of missing my crucial hearing forced me to accept his generous offer. We quickly bypassed the massive taxi line and stepped into a sleek black town car waiting at the curb. The interior was pristine, smelling of expensive leather and quiet authority. As the driver pulled smoothly onto the busy highway, I opened my battered briefcase. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled out the thick stack of financial documents I had spent the last 3 days meticulously organizing. These papers were my only defense against a man who made a lucrative living destroying vulnerable people in court. Winston watched me sort through the heavily highlighted spreadsheets with an analytical gaze. "You seem incredibly prepared for someone whose husband assumes her skills are completely rusty," he noted quietly. I let out a sharp breath, running a finger over a complex column of numbers. "My husband is 36 years old," I explained, keeping my eyes firmly on the paperwork. "He is a ruthless senior associate at one of the top corporate law firms in the entire city. Right now, he is on the absolute verge of making managing partner. It is literally all he cares about. He spent the last 5 years climbing the corporate ladder by ruthlessly crushing anyone who stood in his path. And now he is actively trying to crush me." I pulled out the proposed settlement agreement he had sent over. It was a pathetic, deeply insulting legal document. "He offered me a measly $50,000 go-away settlement," I said, handing the crisp white paper directly to Winston. "He threw me out of our home and handed me this absolute joke of a document. $50,000 for 5 full years of managing his entire personal life. 5 years of giving up my own career as a forensic accountant so he could work 90-hour weeks without ever worrying about a single domestic issue. He actually thinks I'm going to sign this and quietly disappear into the background." Winston scanned the settlement, his expression darkening with visible disgust. "It is an incredibly insulting offer," Winston agreed, handing the paper back to me. "He clearly assumes you are too intimidated by his legal expertise to fight for what you actually deserve. He assumes my brain has completely turned to mush," I replied, my voice growing noticeably colder. "My husband is hopelessly arrogant. He truly believes that because I stayed home for half a decade, I forgot how to track hidden assets. He thinks I am just a desperate housewife who will take his $50,000 and cry myself to sleep. But he forgot that forensic accounting is entirely about finding the lies hidden in the tiny details. I know exactly how to follow the money, and he has been moving a massive amount of money very carelessly." The town car sped across the bridge, the towering skyline of Manhattan looming closer with every passing second. I explained how I had spent countless sleepless nights digging through our joint bank accounts, tracing unusual withdrawals and cross-referencing his firm bonuses. I told Winston about the bizarre financial gaps I had discovered, the numbers that simply did not add up for a man earning a senior associate salary. He thought he could hide his financial movements by burying them under layers of confusing legal jargon. He completely underestimated my distinct ability to decode his fraudulent financial web. Winston listened to every single word with intense focus. He leaned back against the plush leather seat, tapping his fingers thoughtfully. A lawyer who hides marital assets from his wife is often hiding things from his own partners, Winston stated very firmly. Arrogance makes men incredibly careless. They believe they are the smartest person in the room until they finally step into a trap they cannot talk their way out of. Your husband sounds like a man who is exceptionally accustomed to winning by sheer intimidation. We are dealing with a man who absolutely loves the sound of his own voice, I said, stuffing the documents back into my briefcase. He expects an easy victory today. He has his terrible mother by his side to insult me, and his young paralegal along just to twist the knife. He thrives on making people feel small. The driver stopped at the imposing marble steps of the courthouse. I took a deep breath, clutching the handle of my briefcase. My heart pounded against my ribs. Before I could open the door, Winston placed a hand on my arm. You mentioned his ambition, Winston said softly. But you never told me his name. Who is this husband of yours? His full name is Donovan, I said clearly. The atmosphere inside the car shifted instantly. Winston went eerily quiet. An unreadable icy smile formed on his face. Let me walk you right in, Cassidy, he insisted firmly. I nodded and stepped out of the luxurious town car. The heavy glass doors of the Manhattan courthouse loomed ahead. I gripped the handle of my battered black leather briefcase tighter. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Winston walked beside me with a slow but incredibly steady pace. His presence provided an unexpected anchor in the storm of my anxiety. We passed through the rigorous security checkpoint in complete silence. The metal detectors beeped faintly in the background. The courthouse lobby was a massive cavern of echoing footsteps and whispered legal negotiations. The polished floors gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. I scanned the chaotic sea of lawyers and angry couples. It did not take me long to find the source of my impending nightmare. They were standing near the center of the vast atrium like royalty expecting a parade. Donovan stood tall and impossibly arrogant. He wore a custom-tailored Italian suit that probably cost more than my first car. His posture screamed absolute superiority. Flanking his left side was his mother, Beatrice. She was draped in an absurd amount of expensive pearls and a designer coat that screamed faux elite snobbery. Her nose was tilted upward, as if the very air in the public building offended her delicate sensibilities. Clinging desperately to Donovan on his right side was Vanessa. She was his 24-year-old paralegal turned blatant mistress. She wore a dress that was entirely too short for a legal proceeding. She looked at Donovan with a sickening level of manufactured adoration. They looked like a perfectly toxic trio, ready to crush an insignificant bug. I took a deep breath and forced my legs to keep moving forward. I would not let them see my fear. As I approached their tight circle, Beatrice noticed me first. Her eyes raked over my body with immediate and undisguised disgust. She took a deliberate step forward to block my path. Her perfume was heavy. You actually wore that off-the-rack polyester to beg the judge for alimony. Beatrice spat loudly. Her voice echoed off the marble walls, drawing the attention of several passing lawyers. She looked at my simple dark blazer as if it were covered in toxic waste. You are embarrassing my son by just breathing the same air as him. Take the 50 grand my son is offering and disappear back to whatever middle-class hole you crawled out of. We are done playing charity to a woman who brings absolutely nothing of value to this family. You should be down on your knees thanking him for his incredible generosity. I felt a sharp sting of humiliation, but I refused to break eye contact. Beatrice had spent 5 years treating me like an unpaid servant. She had constantly reminded me that my forensic accounting degree was a joke compared to her son passing the bar exam. I tightened my grip on my briefcase. The financial documents inside felt heavy and powerful. I did not need her fake charity. Vanessa leaned closer to Donovan and let out a high-pitched, annoying giggle. She buried her face into his expensive suit jacket. She is actually trying to look professional, Vanessa whispered loudly enough for everyone in a 10-foot radius to hear perfectly. It is almost cute how hard she is trying today. Donovan did not even bother to reprimand his mistress. He simply stroked her arm and turned his cold, calculating gaze toward me. His eyes held absolutely zero remorse for destroying our 5-year marriage. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a sleek silver pen. He slid the pen across a small marble counter separating us. He looked at me like a predator observing a wounded animal. "Sign the settlement," Cassidy Donovan sneered. His voice dripped with pure condescension. "Stop wasting the court's valuable time with your pathetic delusions of grandeur. You have not even looked at a spreadsheet in half a decade. You spent the last 5 years choosing ugly curtains and booking my dinner reservations. You are a glorified housewife playing dress-up today. You cannot beat my legal team. We will completely bankrupt you before you even get to see the judge. Sign the paper, take the cash today, and walk away before I decide to take the 50 grand off the table completely." The sheer audacity of his threat echoed in the vast lobby. He truly believed he had me cornered. He thought his aggressive tactics would make me surrender right there. I looked down at the silver pen resting on the cold marble. I looked back up at his smug face. The man I had supported had transformed into a monster of greed. I could feel Winston standing quietly behind me, observing the interaction with sharp eyes. I did not reach for the pen. I squared my shoulders. "You really think 5 years away from an office made me stupid, Donovan?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "You think picking up your dry cleaning erased my education? You made a massive mistake assuming my silence meant I was blind." Beatrice let out a harsh scoff. "Stop pretending you have leverage. You are just trying to squeeze more money out of my brilliant son." Vanessa giggled again, holding the pen out to me like a weapon. "Just sign it so we can celebrate his promotion," she chimed in happily. I stared at the three of them. They had no idea about the detailed financial web I had untangled. They had absolutely no idea I knew about the hidden Delaware shell company or the massive wire transfers paying for Vanessa and her luxury apartment. Donovan crossed his arms over his chest. "I am losing my patience, Cassidy. You have exactly 2 minutes to sign that paper before I instruct my lawyers to destroy you. You have absolutely no money, no current career, and no allies in this building. You are completely alone." Donovan forcefully shoved the heavy wooden clipboard directly into my chest. He expected me to stumble backward under his aggressive intimidation. He assumed his usual bullying tactics would shatter my resolve right there in the crowded courthouse lobby. Before I could even react or push the offensive clipboard away from my body, a firm and commanding voice sliced through the heavy tension separating us. Winston Caldwell finally stepped out from behind the massive marble pillar where he had been quietly observing the entire interaction. His posture was rigid, exuding an aura of absolute authority that commanded immediate and total respect. "She is absolutely not alone," Winston stated, his voice resonating with a quiet but terrifying power. He moved to stand directly beside me, acting as an impenetrable shield against my husband. The arrogant sneer that had been plastered across the face of Donovan vanished instantly. All the color rapidly drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin an alarming shade of chalky white. His eyes widened in sheer unadulterated terror. I watched with immense satisfaction as his knees visibly buckled beneath his expensive suit. He actually had to grab the cold marble counter just to keep himself from collapsing completely today. "Professor Caldwell." Donovan stammered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the words. "What are you doing here today?" Beatrice and Vanessa looked at Donovan with extreme confusion. They had never seen the ruthless senior associate lose his composure like this. Beatrice immediately tried to intervene, completely oblivious to the massive danger standing in front of them. "Excuse me, sir," Beatrice snapped haughtily, glaring at Winston. "This is a private family legal matter. I highly suggest you mind your own business before my son decides to have security remove you from this building for harassing his lovely wife." Winston did not even bother to look at Beatrice. He kept his piercing gaze locked entirely on Donovan. Winston was not just a random old man from my flight. He was a legendary legal scholar at the very university where my husband had earned his law degree. He had written the textbooks Donovan studied. But far more importantly, Professor Winston Caldwell currently served as the undisputed chairman of the State Bar Ethics Committee. He held the absolute power to investigate, suspend, or completely disbar any practicing attorney in the entire state. Donovan was essentially staring at his professional executioner today. "Mother, shut your mouth right now!" Donovan hissed frantically, his voice cracking with pure panic. "Do not say another word to this man." Beatrice gasped, deeply offended by the sudden hostility of her son, but she fell silent. Vanessa nervously backed away, sensing the massive shift in power. Winston looked at Donovan with absolute disgust. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. "I came to escort the remarkable woman who just saved my life," Winston finally declared, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "She acted with incredible bravery, while I suffered a severe medical emergency during our flight." Donovan swallowed, hard beads of nervous sweat forming on his forehead. He looked rapidly between me and the chairman, his brilliant legal mind completely short-circuiting. "You know Cassidy," Donovan choked out, clearly struggling to comprehend the nightmare unfolding before his eyes. "I know that she is a woman of exceptional character," Winston replied coldly. "And Donovan, based on the disgusting display I just witnessed, it appears your personal ethics are even sloppier than the torts paper you plagiarized in my class 12 years ago. I remember exactly who you are, and I remember exactly how you cut corners constantly." The mention of a plagiarized paper made Donovan flinch, as if he had been physically struck. The mighty senior associate looked like a terrified law student caught cheating on a final exam. "I can explain everything," Professor Donovan pleaded defensively. "This divorce is highly complicated. My wife is simply being unreasonable about the financial division." Winston raised a single hand, instantly silencing the pathetic attempt of my husband at damage control. "Do not insult me by lying to my face," Winston warned softly. "I heard every word you just said to her now. I heard you threaten to bankrupt her. I also heard you attempt to coerce her into signing a heavily flawed settlement agreement under intense duress." Winston continued, stepping closer to Donovan. "As the chairman of the ethics committee, I take a very dim view of licensed attorneys using intimidation tactics against unrepresented parties in the lobby of a courthouse. It demonstrates a severe lack of professional integrity." Donovan looked like he was going to be sick right there on the polished marble floor. His entire career flashed before his eyes. Beatrice finally realized the gravity of the situation, her haughty demeanor crumbling into visible, anxious, genuine fear. "This must be a terrible misunderstanding," Beatrice offered weakly, her voice losing all its previous venom. "My son is a highly respected professional." Winston finally turned his attention back to Beatrice. "Character is revealed in how a man treats the people he believes have no power," Winston stated flatly. "Your son just demonstrated exactly what kind of professional he truly is right now." Winston turned his attention back to me. He offered me a warm, reassuring smile. "Let us proceed to your hearing, Cassidy. I believe the judge will be highly interested in reviewing those forensic accounting files right now." I smiled back, feeling a massive surge of triumph. I grabbed the clipboard Donovan had shoved into my chest and dropped it carelessly onto the floor. The loud clatter echoed in the silent lobby. "I am ready," I said confidently. I walked past Donovan without giving him another glance. Vanessa pressed herself against the wall, trying to become invisible. Beatrice stared at the ground. Donovan remained frozen in place, utterly defeated. I knew his cheap intimidation tactics had just triggered a catastrophic chain of events. His arrogance had finally met its match, and my financial revenge was just officially beginning. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung open forcefully. I walked down the center aisle with my head held extremely high. Professor Winston Caldwell took a seat in the front row of the public gallery. He did not sit directly with me at the petitioner table. However, his mere presence was a massive and suffocating weight pressing down on my husband. Donovan scrambled to his seat alongside his highly overpriced defense attorney. His lawyer, a slick man named Richard Campbell, looked visibly confused by the sheer panic radiating from his usually arrogant client. Beatrice slipped into the gallery a few rows behind Winston. She crossed her arms tightly still, desperately trying to project an air of untouchable wealth. Vanessa chose to sit as far back as physically possible. She was frantically typing on her cellular phone. Judge Patricia Bennett entered the quiet courtroom. She struck her wooden gavel and formally called the morning hearing to order. The judge looked down at the initial legal filings. She noted immediately that I was representing myself today. I had explicitly refused to hire a costly attorney because I knew my forensic accounting skills were my absolute greatest weapon. Donovan whispered furiously to Richard Campbell. He was clearly terrified that Winston was actively watching the proceedings. However, basic survival instinct eventually kicked in for my treacherous husband. He was a cornered animal desperate to salvage his millions. He nodded sharply at his lawyer, giving him the direct signal to proceed with their primary legal trap. Your Honor, Richard Campbell began standing up and smoothing his expensive silk tie. We believe this hearing can be concluded quite swiftly this morning. My client and the petitioner have a legally binding prenuptial agreement. This document explicitly outlines that in the event of a dissolution of marriage, the petitioner formally waives all rights to marital assets, spousal support, and any claims to the financial accounts of my client. We ask that the court recognize this executed agreement and grant the default settlement of $50,000 as previously offered. Mr. Campbell approached the high wooden bench. He handed a thick, professionally bound document directly to the court clerk. The clerk passed it up to Judge Bennett. I felt a cold chill run down my spine, but I kept my posture perfectly straight. I turned my head slightly to look at the public gallery. Beatrice was sitting up very straight. A vicious, ugly smirk was actively playing on her lips. She looked at me with triumphant glee. She was absolutely certain that her son had just executed a flawless legal checkmate. She truly thought my lack of legal representation meant I was completely defenseless against a signed contract. Judge Bennett adjusted her reading glasses carefully. She spent a long moment silently reviewing the document. The courtroom was agonizingly quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of the overhead air conditioning. Finally, the judge looked down at me from her bench. Mrs. Sterling, she addressed me using my married name for what I hoped would be the very last time in my life. I have a legal document here dated October 14th, 5 years ago. It bears your signature on the final page, explicitly waiving your rights to equitable distribution. Do you recognize this document, and did you willingly sign it? Donovan leaned back in his leather chair. He finally managed to summon a faint, highly arrogant smile. He genuinely thought he had outsmarted me. He thought a simple piece of paper would magically erase half a decade of extreme financial manipulation. I did not cry. I did not shake. I stood up slowly and looked Judge Bennett dead in the eye. Yes, Your Honor, I replied. My voice rang clear and remarkably steady across the quiet courtroom. That is indeed my legal signature on the final page of that document. However, I absolutely contest the validity of this agreement based on fraudulent execution and severe emotional coercion. Richard Campbell immediately jumped to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. The petitioner is making wild, unsubstantiated allegations simply because she deeply regrets signing a standard protective contract today. I will allow her to speak, Judge Bennett interrupted firmly. She raised her hand to instantly silence the loud lawyer. You may fully explain your claim of fraud, Mrs. Sterling. I turned my body slightly so I could look directly at Donovan while I addressed the esteemed judge. I signed that document on October 14th, exactly 5 years ago, I stated clearly. I would like the court to note that October 14th is the exact day my beloved father passed away from a sudden and massive stroke. I was 27 years old. I was entirely devastated. I was frantically planning a funeral with absolutely no immediate family left to help me. The smug smile instantly vanished from the face of my husband. Beatrice shifted incredibly uncomfortably in the wooden gallery pews. The judge lowered her glasses. Her expression hardened significantly as she listened to my specific timeline. On the morning of my father and his tragic death, I continued. My voice gained incredible strength with every single word I spoke. Donovan came to my childhood home. He brought a massive stack of complex legal paperwork and several funeral home invoices. I was sobbing uncontrollably at my kitchen table. I could barely read the printed words on the pages through my blinding tears. My husband deliberately placed this specific document at the very bottom of the thick stack of funeral invoices. He handed me a pen. He told me it was a routine joint account authorization form. He swore to me that he desperately needed my signature immediately so he could release funds from our shared savings to pay the expensive burial fees for my father. He completely weaponized my extreme grief to legally rob me of my marital rights. He cruelly manipulated the darkest day of my entire life just to guarantee his own financial future. He is a total fraud. Richard Campbell slammed his hand against the heavy wooden table before the final syllable even left my lips. "Objection, Your Honor!" he shouted, his voice echoing sharply across the tense courtroom. "This is nothing but baseless emotional manipulation designed to distract the court from a legally binding contract. The petitioner is fabricating a highly dramatic narrative because she has absolutely no factual standing today. I ask that her entire testimony regarding the funeral be immediately stricken from the official record." Judge Bennett did not strike her gavel. She simply stared down at the frantic defense attorney with a look of pure, unadulterated skepticism. She turned her sharp gaze back toward my husband. Donovan had shifted in his leather chair. His knuckles were completely white as he gripped the edge of the defendant table. He was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling in rapid, uneven motions. Beatrice had stopped smirking in the gallery. The heavy pearl necklace she wore suddenly seemed to be choking her. "I will determine what constitutes emotional manipulation in my courtroom," Mr. Campbell, Judge Bennett stated coldly. However, she turned her attention back to me. "Mrs. Sterling, these are incredibly severe allegations. Emotional coercion and fraud are massive claims. Do you possess any tangible proof to support this narrative? Or are we simply relying on your personal recollection of a highly traumatic day?" I did not flinch. The moment she asked for proof, a profound sense of calm washed over my entire body. This was my domain. The emotional vulnerability I had displayed moments ago vanished completely. My forensic accounting instincts, dormant for 5 long years, roared back to life with razor-sharp precision. I reached down and grabbed the brass latches of my battered black briefcase. The metal clicked loudly in the silent room. I opened the worn leather flap. I did not pull out a diary or a box of tissues. I pulled out cold, hard, undeniable facts. "Your Honor, my husband loves to remind everyone that I have spent the last half-decade functioning solely as a housewife," I said smoothly. My voice carried a dangerous, steady rhythm. He assumed my brain had completely rotted away while I picked up his dry cleaning and organized his dinner parties. He fundamentally forgot that before I married him, I was a highly decorated forensic accountant. I specialize in finding money that arrogant men try very hard to hide. I lifted a massive 2-inch thick stack of financial documents from my briefcase. Every single page was meticulously tabbed, color-coded, and cross-referenced. I walked deliberately toward the center of the room. I dropped the heavy stack of highlighted bank statements, credit card receipts, and wire transfer logs directly in front of the court clerk. The heavy thud of the paper hitting the wooden desk made Donovan physically jump in his seat. "I request to submit this comprehensive financial audit into evidence," I declared loudly. Over the past 3 days, I conducted a full forensic analysis of every single joint account, personal credit line, and investment portfolio attached to my husband. What I discovered was not just an attempt to hide marital assets. It is a highly coordinated, systematic siphoning of massive funds. Richard Campbell shot up from his chair again. "Objection. The petitioner is not acting as a licensed expert witness. She cannot simply dump unverified spreadsheets into the court record and present them as fact." The judge held up her hand, instantly silencing him. "I am a judge who appreciates a thorough paper trail, Mr. Campbell." She leaned forward, adjusting her glasses as the clerk handed her the top file. "Proceed with your findings, Mrs. Sterling." I turned my body slightly so I could look directly at Donovan. He was sweating profusely now. The expensive Italian suit suddenly looked 2 sizes too big for his shrinking frame. I looked past him to the gallery. Vanessa was biting her fingernails, her previous giggling completely replaced by sheer panic. Winston Caldwell sat perfectly still, a look of profound respect settling onto his wise features. If I waived my rights, Your Honor, then Donovan should explain the $140,000 siphoned from our joint savings into a Delaware shell company named Blue Horizon over the last 6 months. A company that holds the lease to the luxury condo his paralegal Vanessa currently occupies. Donovan choked on his own breath. He reached for his water glass, but his hand was trembling so violently he knocked it over. The water spilled across his legal pads, but he did not even try to clean it up. Vanessa gasped loudly. She covered her mouth with both hands, shrinking down into the wooden pew as every single eye in the courtroom suddenly turned to look at her. Beatrice let out a strangled noise of pure horror. Her son was not just a cheat. He was an incredibly careless cheat who was funding his mistress with family money right under her nose. The judge flipped open the heavy file folder. Her eyes widened slightly as she followed my bright yellow highlights, tracking the undeniable flow of stolen money. She looked up at Donovan, her expression transforming from neutral observation to active hostility. Donovan sat completely frozen. The color drained thoroughly from his face. His high-priced lawyer stared at the documents in utter disbelief, realizing his client had lied to him about the existence of hidden assets. I stood tall in the center of the room. The cheap polyester blazer Beatrice had mocked earlier felt like a suit of impenetrable armor. I had completely dismantled the financial illusion my husband had spent years building. The numbers laid bare his entire deceit, proving that his arrogance was his ultimate downfall. You underestimated the quiet accountant you forced to play house. Now you will pay the exact price of your staggering greed. Every single stolen penny has been successfully exposed by the very woman you foolishly assumed was too weak. Judge Bennett slammed her heavy folder shut with a resounding thud that echoed like a gunshot through the silent courtroom. She removed her reading glasses slowly, her eyes burning with a furious intensity directed at the defense table. The absolute audacity required to present a prenuptial agreement while concealing $140,000 of marital assets is staggering. The judge stated, her voice sharp and uncompromising. Mr. Campbell, you had better hope your client lied to you about his financial disclosures, because if I discover you knew about this Delaware shell company, I will personally see you sanctioned by the state bar. Richard Campbell stepped away from Donovan. He held both hands up in a gesture of complete surrender. Your Honor. I had absolutely no prior knowledge of this specific entity or these transactions. My client assured me his financial affidavits were accurate and fully comprehensive. Donovan glared at his own attorney, his face twisting with sheer panic as his legal defense crumbled instantly. He opened his mouth to speak, but the judge raised her hand to silence him before a single word could escape his lips. Do not speak, Mr. Sterling, Judge Bennett commanded fiercely. You are treading on incredibly thin ice right now. Based on the overwhelming forensic evidence provided by the petitioner today, I am issuing an immediate emergency freeze on the corporate accounts associated with Blue Horizon. Furthermore, I am ordering a full financial freeze on all your personal and business banking accounts until a court-appointed auditor can verify the extent of this deception. Donovan gasped aloud. His entire arrogant facade shattered into a million tiny pieces. Without access to his accounts, his luxurious lifestyle and his mistress were instantly cut off. Beatrice let out a sharp cry from the public gallery, finally grasping the terrifying reality that her golden son was about to face a massive financial reckoning. I am adjourning this hearing for exactly 48 hours. The judge continued, striking her wooden gavel with absolute authority. We will reconvene on Thursday morning. Mr. Sterling, I suggest you spend that time finding every single hidden asset you possess. Because if Mrs. Sterling finds another offshore account before you disclose it, I will hold you in criminal contempt of court. We are adjourned. The sudden strike of the gavel signaled my massive victory. I remained perfectly calm as I carefully gathered my highlighted bank statements and placed them back into my battered leather briefcase. The brass latches clicked shut with a satisfying snap. I turned to look at the gallery. Vanessa had already sprinted out the back doors, desperate to escape the humiliating spotlight. Beatrice sat completely frozen in the wooden pew, her expensive pearl necklace clutched tightly in her trembling hands. Winston Caldwell stood up from his seat in the front row. He did not say a word to Donovan. He simply gave me a slow, deeply respectful nod before turning and exiting the courtroom with quiet dignity. His silent approval meant everything. I had fought my own battle using my own weapons, and I had won the first major round. I walked down the center aisle feeling lighter than I had in 5 long years. The heavy oak doors swung open, leading me out into the expansive marble hallway of the courthouse. The corridor was filled with frantic lawyers and anxious clients, but I navigated through the crowd with my head held incredibly high. I had exposed his massive fraud. I had protected my future, but my victory lap was abruptly cut short. Cassidy, stop right there. The harsh, demanding voice cracked like a whip behind me. I turned around to find Donovan storming out of the courtroom. His previous fear of Professor Caldwell had been completely eclipsed by a blinding, venomous rage. His face was flushed and his eyes darted around the crowded hallway before locking onto me with absolute malice. He marched forward, his expensive leather shoes clicking aggressively against the marble floor. He stepped directly into my path, forcing me to stop walking. He leaned in dangerously close, completely ignoring the public setting. The sophisticated gentleman lawyer routine was gone. The charming mask he wore for his wealthy clients and his powerful firm partners had entirely melted away, revealing the ruthless monster hiding underneath. "You actually think you won something today?" Donovan hissed. His voice was a low, menacing growl that sent a momentary shiver down my spine. "You think playing detective with a few printed bank statements makes you some kind of forensic genius?" I stood my ground, refusing to step back or show any weakness. "The judge certainly thought my evidence was compelling," I replied smoothly. "She froze your accounts, Donovan. Your secret Delaware slush fund is completely locked. You cannot spend another dime of our marital assets on your pathetic mistress." Donovan let out a dark, humorless laugh. He leaned even closer, invading my personal space to deliver his threat. The sheer arrogance radiating from his body was truly suffocating. "You think a few credit card receipts will ruin me?" Donovan whispered harshly, his breath hot against my cheek. "I hide money for billionaires, Cassidy. I build financial labyrinths that federal regulators cannot even untangle. You caught a single mistake because I was sloppy with a domestic account. You have absolutely no idea how deep my real accounts go. I control assets you cannot even comprehend." I tightened my grip on my briefcase, maintaining direct eye contact. His words were designed to terrify me, to make me feel small and insignificant against his corporate power. "Enjoy your tiny victory today," he sneered, his eyes filled with pure, vindictive promise. "Because when we walk back into that courtroom on Thursday, I am going to unleash a legal team that will systematically destroy your entire life. I will bury you in so much debt and litigation that you will be begging to sign that $50,000 settlement. By Friday, you will be on the street." I did not let his malicious threat break my carefully maintained composure. I simply turned on my heel and walked away. The echoing sound of my sensible shoes against the marble floor felt like a victory march. I stepped out into the crisp New York air, pulling my coat tighter around my shoulders. I had survived the first battle, but Donovan was a wounded animal now. He would undoubtedly strike back with everything he had. I needed to prepare my next move. I needed to dig deeper into the financial labyrinth he had arrogantly bragged about. My phone vibrated aggressively in my pocket before I even reached the subway station. The caller identification displayed the name of my mother-in-law. I considered ignoring it completely, but Beatrice was not the type of woman to give up easily. I accepted the call, preparing myself for a barrage of insults. Instead, her voice sounded entirely different. It was sickeningly sweet and dripped with manufactured concern. "Cassidy, darling, we need to talk," Beatrice began smoothly. The tension in the courtroom today was simply dreadful. We are family, and family should not fight like vicious strangers in front of a judge. "We want to invite you to the estate tonight for a peaceful mediation dinner. We can sort this entire mess out quietly over a nice glass of wine." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "I am absolutely not coming to your house for dinner, Beatrice. Your son just threatened to leave me homeless by Friday. There is nothing peaceful to discuss. The sweet tone vanished instantly, replaced by cold, hard steel. You will come to dinner tonight, Cassidy, Beatrice stated, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Because if you do not walk through my front doors at 7 o'clock sharp, my personal attorneys will file an emergency petition in probate court tomorrow morning. They will heavily contest the transfer of your late father and his modest estate. We will freeze the tiny inheritance he left you. We will drag his name through the mud and tie up his assets in brutal litigation for the next decade. Do not test me. I know exactly how much that tiny house means to you. She hung up before I could utter a single word of protest. My blood boiled with a mixture of sheer rage and terrifying panic. My father had worked his entire life to pay off that small suburban house. It was the only tangible memory I had left of him. Beatrice knew it was my absolute weak point. She was holding his legacy hostage just to force me into a room with them. I had no choice but to comply. I spent the afternoon securing my forensic files and encrypting my laptop. Promptly at 7 o'clock, I pulled up to the massive iron gates of the Sterling family estate in upstate New York. The sprawling mansion loomed in the darkness like a hostile fortress. A private butler opened the heavy oak doors, ushering me into a massive foyer decorated with expensive art and crystal chandeliers. The oppressive display of wealth was designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. I kept my chin high. I walked into the formal dining room, stepping directly into the lion's den. The long mahogany table was set with immaculate silver and fine china. Beatrice sat at the head of the table, looking like a venomous queen holding court. Donovan sat to her right, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. His younger sister Brittany sat across from him, tapping her perfectly manicured nails against the table. The only person who looked genuinely uncomfortable was DeAndre, Brittany's husband, who sat quietly at the far end, staring at his plate. "Sit down," Cassidy, Beatrice commanded, gesturing to the empty antique chair directly opposite her. The personal chef served our first course in total silence. The psychological warfare commenced before I even picked up my fork. "We are so deeply disappointed in your dramatic courtroom performance today." Beatrice started cutting her perfectly seared steak with clinical precision. "You embarrassed Donovan in front of his peers. You made wild, unfounded accusations that could severely damage his professional reputation at the firm." "I did not make accusations," I corrected sharply. "I presented hard, verified financial facts. Donovan stole $140,000 from our joint accounts to fund a luxury apartment for his mistress. The numbers are undeniably clear." Beatrice waved her hand dismissively, completely unfazed by the blatant reality of her son committing adultery and financial fraud. "You are being completely hysterical and entirely unreasonable." Beatrice sighed, adopting a tone of faux maternal disappointment. "You simply do not understand complex corporate finance, Cassidy. Donovan did not steal anything. He opened that Delaware shell company to protect your shared assets from aggressive capital gains taxes. He was actually trying to secure your financial future." The sheer audacity of her gaslighting left me momentarily breathless. "You are actually trying to convince me that funding a luxury lease for a 24-year-old paralegal was a savvy tax protection strategy?" I asked, my voice laced with heavy sarcasm. "Do you genuinely think I am that stupid?" Donovan finally spoke, slamming his heavy crystal glass down onto the mahogany table. "My mother is right," he snapped angrily. "You are blowing a standard financial maneuver completely out of proportion. I am a corporate lawyer. I know how to shelter wealth properly. You are trying to ruin my life over a minor accounting discrepancy that you barely even comprehend." I glared directly at him, absolutely refusing to back down. This was their deliberate strategy. They desperately wanted to confuse me tonight. They needed to make me deeply doubt my own professional expertise and sanity. But the hard numbers permanently etched into my perfect memory were absolutely solid. I would never let them successfully gaslight me into surrendering the justice I so rightfully and truly deserved to win here tonight against my husband. The silence that followed my internal declaration was abruptly shattered by a sharp, highly irritating laugh, echoing from across the mahogany table. Brittany leaned forward in her antique chair, her heavily manicured fingers reaching up to intentionally stroke the massive, blindingly bright diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. She had remained uncharacteristically quiet until this exact moment, letting her mother and brother launch the initial psychological attacks. Now, the spoiled younger sister was absolutely ready to join the coordinated family ambush. She looked at my sensible, inexpensive attire with the same potent disgust her mother had displayed earlier in the courthouse lobby. She swirled her own glass of expensive red wine, a condescending smirk painted across her meticulously contoured face. "You are being entirely ridiculous and overly dramatic right now," Brittany announced loudly, her tone dripping with unearned superiority. "You genuinely act like you contributed something of actual tangible value to this marriage or to this family." She gestured wildly with her free hand, the light catching the sparkling tennis bracelet wrapped around her wrist. "My brother is a senior corporate attorney handling multi-million-dollar mergers every single week. Donovan works 80 hours a week to fund this family trust. You just sat at home baking sourdough." She delivered the final sentence like a practiced theatrical punchline, expecting her mother and her brother to immediately burst into supportive applause. Beatrice let out a soft, approving chuckle, taking a delicate sip from her crystal goblet. Donovan simply crossed his arms tighter across his chest, visibly pleased that his younger sister was fiercely defending his fraudulent financial empire. They operated as a unified toxic front perfectly designed to break down anyone who dared to question their manufactured reality. Brittany leaned even closer to the center of the heavy table, her eyes narrowing as she prepared to deliver another verbal blow. "You really think a few highlighted bank statements give you the ultimate right to sit here and demand respect?" she mocked openly. "You should be exceptionally grateful he even offered you $50,000. That is incredibly generous for a woman who has not earned a single paycheck in 5 long years. You are a complete financial parasite, Cassidy." I did not break eye contact with her. I did not let my voice tremble or my posture falter under her vicious, coordinated assault. I looked directly at the massive glittering diamond necklace hanging heavily around her neck. It was a stunning piece of jewelry, easily worth over $200,000. I knew the exact value because I had seen the highly encrypted insurance appraisal documents buried deep within the financial disclosures I audited just days ago. I kept my face perfectly neutral, masking the explosive knowledge I held tightly in my mind. "You certainly love to talk about financial contributions, Brittany," I replied calmly, my voice steady and measured. "It is remarkably easy to pass judgment on my lack of recent paychecks when your entire luxurious lifestyle is entirely funded by a trust account you never worked a single day to build." Brittany gasped loudly, her face flushing with immediate defensive rage. "How dare you speak to me like that in my very own childhood home?" she shrieked, slamming her wineglass down onto the table. "I am a blood member of this family. I belong here. You are just a temporary, incredibly expensive mistake my brother made. He is finally fixing that mistake by throwing you out on the street where you absolutely belong." Before I could even formulate a response to her childish outburst, a subtle movement at the far end of the long dining table caught my immediate attention. DeAndre shifted quietly in his seat. He was a tall, brilliantly intelligent African-American man who commanded respect without ever needing to raise his voice. At 38 years old, he was one of the most highly sought-after cybersecurity architects in the entire country. He designed impenetrable digital fortresses for massive global corporations. He was also the unfortunate husband of Brittany, a fact that had always baffled me during family gatherings. DeAndre and I had rarely spoken at length over the past 5 years, mostly because the toxic nature of these dinners usually kept everyone strictly isolated in their designated social roles. Right now, DeAndre sat entirely in silence. He held a heavy crystal tumbler filled with neat whiskey. He slowly rotated the glass, watching the amber liquid swirl around the edges. His face remained completely stoic, but the subtle tightening of his strong jawline revealed everything I needed to know. He was visibly profoundly disgusted by the sickening behavior of his wife, his mother-in-law, and his highly arrogant brother-in-law. He did not say a single word to defend Donovan or Beatrice. He did not nod in agreement when Brittany launched her venomous insults. He simply sat there, radiating a quiet, powerful energy that directly contrasted with the chaotic hostility dominating the rest of the room. DeAndre slowly lifted his gaze from his whiskey glass. He looked past Beatrice, past Donovan, and past his screaming wife. His dark, intelligent eyes locked directly onto mine across the expansive mahogany table. The room was still swirling with loud, angry voices, but in that brief, highly charged moment, everything else faded away entirely. He gave me a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a gesture of pity or basic sympathy. It was a clear, undeniable signal of profound mutual understanding. We exchanged a brief, incredibly knowing look. He recognized the exact same toxic, manipulative behavior I was currently fighting against. He saw the blatant lies and the deep financial corruption rotting this family from the inside out. He knew exactly what kind of monsters they truly were behind closed doors. That silent exchange of glances shifted the entire dynamic of the terrifying room for me. I was completely surrounded by hostile enemies actively trying to destroy my future, but I was no longer entirely alone. The suffocating atmosphere of the dining room pressed heavily against my chest as Beatrice prepared to launch another calculated verbal assault. Donovan confidently poured himself a second glass of incredibly expensive bourbon, while Brittany sat back in her chair with a deeply satisfied smirk, securely fastened to her heavily contoured face. I realized I desperately needed a temporary physical escape from their highly toxic environment to regain my absolute focus tonight. I carefully placed my linen napkin on the polished mahogany table and firmly stood up from my chair. "Excuse me for a brief moment," I announced clearly, making sure my voice betrayed absolutely no weakness. "I need to use the restroom." Beatrice let out a dramatic sigh of sheer annoyance. "Do try to hurry back, Cassidy," she commanded sharply. "We have very important financial settlements to finalize tonight, and I refuse to waste my entire evening entertaining your ridiculous delusions of grandeur." I did not offer her a response. I simply turned and walked out of the massive dining room. My heels clicked softly against the pristine marble floors of the sprawling Sterling Estate hallway. The air out here felt significantly colder, but immensely easier to breathe. The oppressive display of wealth lined every single wall around me. Gilded mirrors and expensive classical artwork stared down at me like silent, judgmental spectators. I took a deep, shaky breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs. I was surviving the brutal psychological warfare, but the sheer effort was completely exhausting. I turned the corner toward the guest bathroom, my mind racing with complex forensic accounting strategies. I was mentally preparing myself for the inevitable legal fight that would undoubtedly resume the second I sat back down at that terrible mahogany table. Suddenly, a tall figure stepped out from the shadows of an adjacent study room. I gasped softly, instinctively taking a defensive step backward. The dim lighting of the hallway obscured his face for a fleeting second before he stepped forward into the glow of a crystal wall sconce. It was DeAndre. He moved with an incredible, terrifying silence for a man of his impressive stature. He glanced quickly back down the long corridor toward the dining room, ensuring no one had followed me. His typically stoic expression was replaced by a look of intense, urgent determination. He stepped directly into my personal space, towering over me, but radiating a completely unexpected sense of safety. "Hold out your right hand," DeAndre commanded in a voice so low it was practically a shadow itself. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, totally bewildered by his sudden, stealthy appearance. My heart hammered against my ribs. I slowly extended my right hand palm facing upward. DeAndre reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. Without a single wasted movement, he swiftly slipped a sleek, heavy object directly into my waiting palm. My fingers instinctively curled around it. The object was smooth, rectangular, and remarkably cold to the touch. I looked down and realized I was tightly gripping a highly secure encrypted black USB drive. I looked up at him, my eyes wide with sheer confusion and absolute shock. DeAndre stepped even closer, checking the hallway one more time before leaning his head down toward mine. "You don't deserve this family's garbage, Cassidy," DeAndre whispers. "Donovan thinks he's a mastermind, but he forgot I'm the one who set up his home network security. He hides his off-the-books ledger on a partitioned drive. The password is his mother's maiden name combined with his dog's birth year." The sheer magnitude of his words hit me like a runaway freight train. an off-the-books ledger, a partitioned drive. This was the ultimate holy grail of forensic accounting. This was the exact, undeniable proof I desperately needed to completely destroy the carefully constructed financial illusion my arrogant husband had built over the last 5 years. Donovan had arrogantly bragged about hiding money for billionaires. He genuinely believed his illegal financial labyrinths were entirely impenetrable. He thought he was the smartest person in the room, but in his blinding arrogance, he had completely overlooked the silent, highly observant cybersecurity architect sitting quietly at his own family dinner table. I gripped the black USB drive so tightly that the sharp metal edges dug painfully into my skin. "Why are you doing this?" I asked softly, my voice trembling with profound gratitude and lingering disbelief. "If they find out you helped me, they will completely turn on you. Beatrice will try to destroy your career, and Brittany will make your life a living nightmare." DeAndre let out a harsh, bitter laugh that barely made a sound. "My marriage to Brittany has been a living nightmare for years," he confessed, his dark eyes filled with deep, unmistakable exhaustion. "I stay for my own reasons, but I refuse to sit at that table and watch them systematically destroy an innocent woman just to protect Donovan and his massive ego. I design digital security for a living, Cassidy. I protect valuable assets from vicious predators. Right now, you are the asset that desperately needs protecting, and Donovan is the exact predator I despise." He took a step back, his professional stoic mask instantly snapping back into perfect place. "The encrypted files on that drive contain every single illicit transaction he executed over the past 48 months, DeAndre explained rapidly. "Take it and use your forensic background to decode the data. Rip his entire financial empire to shreds. Make sure he never hurts another person again." I nodded firmly, slipping the heavy black USB drive deep into the hidden pocket of my sensible blazer. "Thank you, DeAndre," I whispered sincerely. "I will not waste this incredible opportunity. I will tear his fraudulent world apart." DeAndre gave me one final respectful nod. "Give them absolute hell, Cassidy," he replied smoothly. He turned on his heel and walked silently back down the marble hallway, effortlessly blending back into the luxurious shadows today. I stood alone in the hallway, allowing my heart rate to settle into a steady rhythm. The encrypted flash drive rested heavily in my pocket, a tangible weapon against the people who had tried to erase me. I smoothed my sensible blazer, squared my shoulders, and walked back into the opulent dining room. The heavy mahogany table looked exactly as hostile as it had when I left it. Donovan was staring at his phone. Beatrice was drumming her manicured fingers against the pristine tablecloth. Brittany was busy admiring her reflection in a silver dinner knife. DeAndre had returned to his seat, staring blankly at the wall, betraying absolutely nothing of our clandestine meeting in the corridor. I pulled out my antique chair and sat down with a quiet confidence that instantly drew their predatory attention. Beatrice did not waste a single second. She dismissed the private chef from the room with a sharp wave of her hand. Once the double doors clicked shut, she reached into a leather portfolio resting beside her wineglass. She pulled out a crisp legal document and slid it directly across the polished wood toward me. The paper stopped right next to my dinner plate. I looked down at it without touching it. "We have decided to be incredibly generous tonight," Beatrice announced, her voice dripping with artificial grace and condescension. "My son has authorized a revised settlement agreement. We are willing to offer you $75,000. That is a massive $25,000 increase from the courtroom offer this morning. We are doing this to save everyone the public embarrassment of a drawn-out legal battle. Sign the paper now, Cassidy. Take the money and leave." Donovan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He tried to project an air of untouchable authority, but I could see a sheen of nervous sweat on his forehead. "You pushed your luck today," Donovan sneered, tapping the document with his index finger. "But the game ends here. My firm will absolutely destroy you if you force us back into that courtroom on Thursday. I am offering you a final lifeline. Take it and run." I stared at the thick white paper. I looked at Donovan, then at Beatrice, and finally at Brittany. A slow, genuine laugh bubbled up from deep inside my chest. It started softly, then grew into a loud ringing sound of pure amusement that echoed off the high ceiling of the dining room. My laughter was not born of hysteria. It was the sound of absolute certainty. I laughed because their transparent desperation was finally laid bare before my eyes. Beatrice stiffened, her face twisting with intense offense. Donovan slammed his hand against the mahogany table, rattling the crystal glasses. "What is so funny?" Donovan barked. I looked directly at his spoiled younger sister. My eyes locked onto the massive, blindingly bright diamond necklace resting against her chest. "I love that diamond, Brittany," I said clearly, my voice slicing through the heavy tension in the room. "But did you know Donovan funded it by taking out a secret secondary mortgage on this very house?" The dining room froze instantly. The suffocating silence that followed my words was absolute. Beatrice let out a sharp gasp, her hand flying to her chest. Brittany turned completely pale. Donovan froze, the color draining rapidly from his arrogant face. "That is a complete lie," Donovan shouted, though his voice cracked noticeably. "Mother, do not listen to a single word she says. She is making wild accusations to cause drama." But I was just getting started. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, matching his aggressive posture with cold facts. "Your brother is not funding the family trust." I continued, my voice steady and ringing with undeniable authority. "He is actively draining it to cover his own massive trading losses. He leveraged the equity of this entire estate just to maintain the illusion of his immense corporate wealth. That necklace you are wearing, Brittany, was purchased with borrowed money secured against the roof over your mother and her head. If Donovan defaults on those hidden loans, the bank will foreclose on this historic mansion within a month." Beatrice turned her horrified gaze slowly toward her golden son. "Donovan, tell me she is lying right now," Beatrice demanded, her voice trembling with genuine terror. "Tell me you did not put a secondary mortgage on my home." Donovan tried to speak, but only a pathetic stuttering sound escaped his lips. He looked frantically at his mother, then at me, unable to formulate a believable lie. His silence was the loudest confession possible in that room. Brittany ripped the diamond necklace from her neck as if the precious stones were suddenly burning her skin. She threw it onto the table. It landed with a loud clatter against the fine china plates. "You used my inheritance to cover your gambling!" Brittany shrieked, standing up so fast her antique chair crashed backward onto the marble floor. "You told me the trust was generating record profits. You lied to me." Beatrice stood up next, her face flushed with terrifying rage. "How could you jeopardize the family estate?" Beatrice screamed at Donovan, completely abandoning her refined society persona. "You arrogant, selfish fool! We could lose absolutely everything because of your reckless vanity." Donovan scrambled to his feet, trying desperately to calm his mother and sister. "Mother, please, I can fix this," he pleaded frantically. "I just need time to move some assets around." But it was entirely too late. The perfectly constructed facade of the wealthy, unified family had been thoroughly shattered by my forensic revelations. Brittany started screaming at her brother, calling him a fraud and a thief. Beatrice began crying hysterically, clutching her face. The dining room transformed instantly into an active war zone. They turned on each other like starved wolves. I calmly picked up my purse, turned my back on the shouting voices, and walked right out. I calmly walked out the front door of the massive mansion and stepped into the cool night air. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind me, completely severing me from the vicious shouting match echoing inside the dining room. I walked down the long driveway, feeling a profound sense of liberation washing over my entire body. I pulled my phone from my pocket and quickly requested a rideshare service to take me back to my small temporary apartment. The headlights of the approaching vehicle pierced the darkness, offering a welcome escape from the suffocating environment of my cruel husband. I slid into the back seat and watched the iron gates of his estate fade into the distance. I knew my dramatic exit was a massive victory, but I also knew the war was far from over. Donovan was a cornered animal now, and cornered animals always strike back with unpredictable and ferocious desperation. I rested my head against the cold glass window, mentally preparing myself for the inevitable retaliation. He would not surrender his wealth or his reputation without launching a catastrophic counterattack. The morning sun filtered through the thin blinds of my modest apartment hours later very clearly. I woke up feeling surprisingly refreshed, Despite the intense psychological warfare of the previous night, I needed absolute focus today. The heavy black encrypted drive resting safely in my pocket contained the ultimate key to my absolute financial freedom. I decided to walk to a small local coffee shop down the street to grab a strong espresso and a quick breakfast before diving into the complex digital labyrinth of hidden assets. The crisp morning air felt incredibly invigorating. I stepped up to the counter and placed my simple order, reaching into my wallet to retrieve my personal debit card now. The barista smiled warmly and swiped the plastic card through the payment machine. A sharp negative beep echoed across the quiet shop. The barista frowned slightly and tried swiping the card a second time. "I am sorry," she said apologetically. "Your card has been declined." I blinked in sheer confusion. I knew for a fact that my personal checking account held a healthy balance of my own hard-earned savings. I handed her a second credit card, one entirely unconnected to my marriage. Another sharp, negative beep sounded loudly. The screen flashed a bright red error message right then there. Both cards were completely frozen. I stepped aside, my heart beginning to race with a sudden icy panic. I quickly pulled out my cellular phone and opened my mobile banking application. The screen loaded slowly, and then the devastating reality hit me like a physical blow. Every single account registered in my name showed a balance of exactly $0, with a bright red notification indicating a total administrative lock. Donovan had unlawfully frozen my personal checking accounts overnight. He had weaponized his powerful legal connections to cut off my only source of financial survival without any prior warning today. He wanted to starve me out. He wanted me penniless, hungry, and entirely desperate before our rescheduled court date tomorrow morning. It was a vicious, highly calculated maneuver designed to break my spirit entirely. I thanked the barista, politely left the hot coffee on the counter, and walked briskly back to my apartment with my mind spinning. I unlocked my apartment door and immediately rushed to my small kitchen table. I booted up my laptop, ready to unleash the devastating evidence hidden on the encrypted drive. I needed to decipher his off-the-books ledger right now without any delay. I plugged the sleek black device into the computer port. The password prompt popped up on the bright screen. I carefully typed his mother and her maiden name, combined perfectly with the birth year of his dog. The loading bar slowly filled. Before the files could even materialize on the screen, a loud, aggressive pounding echoed from my front door. The heavy knocking was incredibly forceful, rattling the wooden frame of my small apartment. I jumped in my chair, my heart leaping into my throat. I quickly pulled the encrypted drive from the laptop port and shoved it deep inside. I shoved the drive into my pocket. The aggressive pounding resumed, followed by a loud, commanding voice that sent a fresh wave of terrifying dread straight down my spine. "Open the door immediately," the deep voice bellowed through the thin wooden frame. "It is the city police department. We have a warrant to speak with you." I stood frozen in the middle of my small kitchen. My hands began to tremble violently. I forced myself to take a deep, steadying breath. I walked slowly to the front door and peered through the small glass peephole at the two stern men. Two large, uniformed police officers stood in the hallway. Their expressions were incredibly stern and highly intimidating. I unlocked the deadbolt and slowly opened the door. The taller officer stepped forward, resting his hand heavily on his utility belt. "Are you Cassidy?" he asked sharply. I nodded, keeping my posture as straight as humanly possible. "I am," I replied calmly. "How can I help you officers this morning?" The second officer pulled out a small notepad. "We received a formal criminal complaint filed by your husband early this morning. He is accusing you of severe corporate espionage today, right now. He is also accusing you of grand larceny," the officer added sternly. My jaw nearly dropped to the floor. Donovan had gone absolutely nuclear. The officers explained that my husband claimed I had stolen highly confidential client files from his secure home office during the family dinner last night. He intentionally framed my forensic accounting audit as a massive federal crime. He wanted me arrested today. He wanted me sitting in a cold jail cell so I would completely miss the rescheduled court hearing. It was his ultimate retaliation. I had to outsmart his ruthless legal trap right now carefully. I invited the officers inside my modest apartment with absolute calm. Panic is exactly what Donovan wanted me to display today. If I acted hysterical or defensive, these officers would easily find probable cause to detain me right here. I offered them seats at my small kitchen table and requested to see the exact details of the complaint. The taller officer handed me a printed summary directly. Donovan claimed I stole physical client folders containing proprietary merger data. I smiled politely and gestured to my small living space. I told them they were welcome to search my briefcase and my immediate surroundings. I explained that I am a licensed forensic accountant and that my husband is currently utilizing aggressive intimidation tactics during our heavily contested divorce proceedings. The officers exchanged a highly skeptical glance with each other. Family disputes often resulted in weaponized police calls, and these experienced officers clearly recognized the familiar pattern immediately. They briefly inspected my empty briefcase and scanned the kitchen counter. Finding absolutely zero evidence of physical corporate files, their initial hostility quickly transformed into mild annoyance at having their valuable time wasted. The taller officer handed me a business card and instructed me to remain available for further questioning later. They walked out of my apartment, leaving me with a temporary but vital window of freedom. I locked the deadbolt and leaned against the solid wood, letting out a long breath. Donovan failed to get me arrested this morning, but I knew he would not stop trying. I needed to move rapidly now. My bank accounts were entirely frozen, but I had a small emergency stash of physical cash hidden inside a hollowed-out book on my shelf. I pulled the crisp bills out and began packing a small duffel bag carefully. If Donovan escalated this to a federal level, I needed to be entirely mobile. I also needed absolute quiet to analyze the encrypted drive DeAndre had given me. Before I could even finish folding my shirts, another sharp knock rattled my front door. My heart hammered against my ribs again. I assumed the officers had returned with a formal warrant. I shoved the cash into my pocket and walked cautiously back to the entryway. I looked through the small glass peephole. It was not the police outside. It was someone significantly worse today. Vanessa stood in my drab hallway wearing a highly expensive designer coat that Donovan definitely paid for. She tapped her glossy high heels against the cheap linoleum floor with intense impatience. I took a deep breath, unlocked the door, and pulled it open wide. I did not invite her inside. She did not bother waiting for an invitation. She simply leaned heavily against the wooden doorframe, blocking me from closing it. A vicious, triumphant smirk stretched across her young face. She looked around my tiny, unadorned apartment with profound disgust. "So this is where you ran to hide," Vanessa sneered, her voice dripping with pure malice. "It is incredibly pathetic, Cassidy. I honestly expected you to put up a much better fight, but you just completely rolled over. I suppose losing all your money overnight really takes the fight out of a person." I stared at her, maintaining absolute silence. Her arrogance was incredibly volatile. I knew that if I simply let her speak, her massive ego would eventually force her to reveal something highly valuable. My silence only encouraged her toxic behavior. She crossed her arms, clearly enjoying her perceived superiority. "Donovan told me the police just paid you a visit," Vanessa continued, flipping her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder. "He is exceptionally angry about that little stunt you pulled at his family dinner last night. You actually thought you could turn his own mother against him. You really are delusional. He told me to come here and deliver a final message. The $50,000 settlement is completely off the table now. You are going to get absolutely nothing from his firm." I kept my facial expression perfectly blank. "You came all the way down here just to tell me I am broke?" I asked, keeping my tone mild and unbothered. "That seems like a massive waste of your morning, Vanessa." She scoffed loudly and stepped an inch closer. "I came here to watch you realize that you have entirely lost," Vanessa bragged happily. "You thought finding that shell company in Delaware made you a genius. Donovan laughed about it all night long. You found the decoy account Cassidy. You found the exact breadcrumbs he intentionally left behind just to keep you busy." My pulse quickened, but I kept my breathing slow and steady. A decoy account. The Delaware funds were substantial, but they were nothing compared to the massive wealth I suspected he truly held. I tilted my head slightly, feigning sheer disbelief. "I know exactly what I found," I replied defensively, playing directly into her massive ego. Vanessa laughed, a high and grating sound that echoed down the empty apartment hallway. "You know absolutely nothing," she boasted loudly. "Donovan already moved the real money to Apex Holdings in the Caymans. You are getting arrested and I am getting the Hamptons house. Just plead guilty, sweetheart. It will save us all a lot of unnecessary paperwork." She looked at me with ultimate contempt, fully believing she had just delivered the final crushing blow to my entire existence. She turned on her expensive heels and walked away down the corridor, laughing loudly as she headed toward the elevator. She felt like a conquering queen, leaving a defeated peasant in the dust. I watched her until the elevator doors slid shut behind her. I stepped backward into my apartment and gently pushed the heavy front door shut. I securely locked the deadbolt. My face was perfectly cold and completely calm. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out my cellular phone. The voice memo application was actively running. I captured every single word today. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone as the audio file safely finished saving to the secure cloud server. A profound wave of icy determination washed over my entire body. Vanessa had walked into my apartment intending to deliver a crushing blow to my spirit, but her sheer arrogance had just handed me the exact weapon I desperately needed. She gave me the specific name of the offshore entity holding the stolen wealth, Apex Holdings. The clock was aggressively ticking now. I had less than 20 hours until I had to stand before Judge Bennett again, and Donovan was actively trying to send the local police back with a formal search warrant before the sun went down. I had to move much faster than his expensive legal team could ever anticipate. I walked directly to my small kitchen table and sat down in the rigid wooden chair. The cheap linoleum surface felt completely different now. It was no longer just a dining table in a temporary rundown apartment. It was my absolute command center. I reached into the hidden pocket of my blazer and retrieved the heavy black encrypted drive DeAndre had slipped into my palm during the disastrous family dinner. The sleek metal felt surprisingly warm against my fingertips. This tiny device held the definitive blueprint of my husband and his massive financial deception. I opened my laptop and plugged the drive directly into the side port. The computer chimed a sharp singular note. A stark black prompt box immediately popped up on the bright screen demanding a security credential. My hands hovered steadily over the keyboard. I recalled the precise instructions DeAndre had whispered to me in the dark hallway. He hides his highly secret hidden ledger on a partitioned drive. The password is his mother, and her maiden name combined perfectly with the birth year of his dog. I typed the letters methodically, Vanderbilt. I followed it immediately with the numbers representing the golden retriever Beatrice had purchased a decade ago. 2012. I hit the enter key with a forceful strike of my index finger. The screen froze for an agonizingly long second. My breath hitched in my throat as the decryption software processed the complex alphanumeric combination. Then the heavy digital locks simply vanished. The partitioned drive burst wide open. A massive folder directory materialized on my desktop. I instantly entered a deep, unbroken forensic accounting flow state. The anxiety, the police threat, and the bitter betrayal all melted away into the background noise of my mind. I was entirely in my element now. The world reduced itself to rows, columns, dates, and highly intricate routing numbers. This was a language I spoke with absolute unmatched fluency. I opened the master search function and rapidly typed the two words Vanessa had so foolishly gifted me, Apex Holdings. The system whirred softly as it scanned through thousands of hidden documents, encrypted tax returns, and heavily redacted corporate ledgers. A massive spreadsheet file loaded onto the center of my screen. The title simply read, Apex Master Ledger. I clicked the file, and an absolute ocean of raw financial data poured endlessly across my monitor. Row after row of staggering numerical values illuminated the dark room. Donovan had indeed moved the real money, and the sheer volume of his hidden wealth was absolutely breathtaking. I began tracking the specific wire transfers by perfectly matching the dates with his major corporate merger announcements over the past 4 years. The $50,000 settlement he had offered me was less than a fraction of a percent of what he had actively funneled out of our entire marital estate. I scrolled rapidly down the endless columns, tracing the complex money trail as it wound its way through a highly sophisticated network of domestic shell companies before finally jumping across international borders. He had routed hundreds of thousands of dollars through fake vendor invoices attached to his law firm. He sent the money to accounts in Delaware, bounced it through a secondary holding company in Nevada, and ultimately wired the massive sums directly into the secure Cayman Island accounts managed by Apex Holdings. The financial architecture was incredibly dense, designed specifically to exhaust and confuse any standard divorce attorney who dared to look closely. But I was not a standard divorce attorney. I was a highly decorated forensic accountant, and his digital fingerprints were recklessly smeared all over the ledgers. The deeper I dug into the numbers, the more the horrifying truth became entirely clear. Donovan was not merely hiding our shared marital assets to avoid a fair, equitable distribution. The scale of the money flowing into the Cayman accounts vastly exceeded his lucrative senior associate salary and his annual firm bonuses combined. I pulled up a secondary document detailing a massive corporate acquisition his law firm had brokered 2 years ago. I matched the exact billing dates to a series of exorbitant, unexplained deposits resting securely in the Apex Holdings account. My husband was actively overbilling his own major wealthy corporate clients, skimming the massive excess profits and laundering the stolen funds through the very shell companies he arrogantly bragged about building. This was no longer just a contentious divorce proceeding. This was a massive, highly illegal federal crime. Donovan had committed severe wire fraud, extensive corporate embezzlement, and international money laundering. I highlighted the most damning sequences of transactions, taking rapid screenshots and transferring the raw data files directly to my own secure encrypted cloud storage. The police could knock on my door with a search warrant at any given moment, but they would find absolutely nothing on my physical laptop. I was building an impenetrable digital fortress of evidence. The trap was officially sprung, and Donovan had zero idea that his boastful mistress and his highly observant relative, DeAndre, had just handed me the very rope I would use to completely hang him in federal court. I was ready. I stared at the glowing screen for hours, tracing the complex digital threads my husband had so arrogantly woven. The sheer scale of his financial deception demanded my absolute focus. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes scanning the endless rows of alphanumeric data pouring from the decrypted ledger. The shock of finding his Cayman Island accounts faded, replaced by the calculating precision of a forensic investigator. I opened a secondary window and accessed the public financial disclosures of his law firm. I needed to cross-reference his offshore transfers against the high-profile corporate mergers he had managed over the past 4 years. I started with his celebrated legal victory, a massive acquisition involving a telecommunications giant. Donovan had bragged about this specific deal for months, claiming his negotiation tactics saved the firm millions. I pulled up the billing statements from the decrypted drive and compared them to the publicly available transaction records. A glaring discrepancy jumped out at me. The numbers simply did not align. The firm had billed the client for consultation services provided by an independent vendor named Vertex Solutions. I copied the vendor name and pasted it into a global corporate registry database. The search results returned a staggering revelation. Vertex Solutions was not a legitimate firm. It was an incredibly transparent shell company registered to a vacant post office box in Delaware. I tracked routing numbers attached to the vendor payments. The massive sums of money did not stay in Delaware. They bounced rapidly through a highly sophisticated network of intermediary accounts before landing directly into the offshore vault managed by Apex Holdings. My heart pounded heavily against my ribs as the dark reality of his scheme became undeniably clear. Donovan was actively stealing from Fortune 500 companies. He systematically overbilled his wealthy clients, inflating the legal costs by millions of dollars. He funneled the excess cash through these fake vendors, laundering the stolen funds before hiding them in the Cayman Islands. He treated the most powerful corporations in the country like his own personal piggy bank. I opened another file and repeated the exact same cross-referencing process with a different client. This time, it was a massive pharmaceutical conglomerate. I found another fake vendor, another series of inflated invoices, and another massive wire transfer, perfectly matching a deposit in his offshore ledger. The pattern was incredibly consistent and devastatingly reckless. Donovan had built an entire shadow economy within the walls of his elite law firm. He was running a massive illegal conspiracy right under the noses of his senior partners. The sheer arrogance required to execute such a blatant financial crime was absolutely breathtaking. He genuinely believed his status as a brilliant legal mind made him entirely untouchable. He thought no one would ever dare to question his complex billing structures. But he had fundamentally misunderstood the basic principles of forensic accounting. Money always leaves a highly visible trail. I spent the next 6 hours meticulously documenting every single fraudulent transaction. I took high-resolution screenshots of the fake vendor invoices. I mapped the exact routing numbers used to launder the stolen cash. I created a comprehensive, undeniable digital portfolio proving his massive federal crimes. My husband was no longer just a cheating spouse trying to hide his annual bonuses to avoid a fair divorce settlement. He was a highly active corporate criminal committing severe wire fraud and international money laundering on a truly staggering scale. The $50,000 settlement he had offered me felt like a distant joke. He had threatened to leave me absolutely homeless by Friday. He promised to use his expensive legal team to destroy my entire life. But the documents illuminating my laptop screen proved that his entire powerful existence was built on a fragile house of cards. I had the exact evidence required to tear his fraudulent empire straight down to the ground. I carefully saved the final encrypted file to my secure cloud server. I leaned back in my rigid wooden chair and rubbed my tired eyes. The sun was beginning to set outside my small apartment window, casting long dark shadows across the kitchen floor. I had survived the aggressive police visit and Vanessa's deeply arrogant gloating session. I had successfully cracked the hidden ledger and uncovered a massive federal conspiracy. But I knew the most dangerous part of my plan was still ahead. This evidence was explosive, but it required an airtight chain of custody to be truly lethal in a courtroom. I could not simply walk into family court tomorrow and hand these documents to a divorce judge. I needed undeniable proof that tied these specific offshore transactions directly to Donovan and his personal devices. I needed to eliminate any possible deniability. He would undoubtedly try to claim that his firm partners had orchestrated the fraud or that a rogue hacker had planted the evidence on his home network. I needed the digital internet protocol logs to prove that my husband had personally executed these illegal wire transfers from his own computer. And there was only one person highly skilled enough to provide me with that exact irrefutable technical evidence. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cellular phone. I scrolled past the numerous threatening text messages from Beatrice and the angry missed calls from Donovan's legal team. I found the secure contact number. I typed a brief, highly urgent message to DeAndre. I told him I had successfully decrypted the drive and uncovered the massive corporate embezzlement scheme. I explained that I urgently needed the specific digital logs tying Donovan directly to the Cayman Island transfers to seal the federal case completely. I hit send and watched the message encrypt itself instantly. The digital trap was fully loaded and perfectly primed. I just needed the final piece of technical evidence to guarantee my absolute victory. I slowly closed my laptop, my mind completely focused and exceptionally calm. The ultimate reckoning for my husband was rapidly approaching tonight. I sat in the dark kitchen for what felt like an eternity. The glow of the streetlights outside cast long shadows across the cheap linoleum floor. I knew the intense danger I was currently facing. This was no longer a simple dispute over alimony or a modest hidden savings account. I was holding irrefutable proof of a massive federal crime. Donovan had stolen millions from powerful corporations. Men who commit fraud on that staggering scale do not simply surrender when they get caught. If my husband suspected that I possessed the master ledger for Apex Holdings, he would not just send his aggressive lawyers after me. He would deploy private security contractors or worse to permanently silence my discoveries. I needed to ensure this digital dossier was completely indestructible. I opened my laptop again and executed a highly advanced military-grade encryption protocol. I transferred the comprehensive financial evidence onto 3 separate external hard drives. I hid one drive inside the lining of my winter coat. I sealed the second drive inside a waterproof plastic bag and taped it securely underneath the bathroom sink. The third drive remained in my pocket. If Donovan managed to send someone to raid my apartment tonight, they would never find all the backups. My evidence was completely secure and highly admissible for any federal prosecutor. My encrypted messaging application chimed softly in the silent apartment. I grabbed my cellular phone immediately. The incoming text message was brief and highly specific. DeAndre had finally replied. The message read to meet him at an all-night diner on the edge of the city at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning. He instructed me to leave my personal cell phone at the apartment to avoid any digital tracking. I felt a surge of adrenaline rush through my veins. DeAndre understood the severe risks perfectly. I changed into a dark, hooded sweatshirt and slipped out the back exit of my temporary apartment building. The New York streets were unusually quiet at this hour. The damp night air bit through my thin clothing as I walked several blocks to hail a random yellow taxi. I gave the driver the address and sat quietly in the back seat. The bright neon signs of the city blurred past the rain-streaked window. Every passing car made my heart race. I constantly checked the rearview mirror to ensure no one was actively following me. The diner was a run-down establishment bathed in flickering fluorescent light. It smelled heavily of old coffee and fried food. I walked inside and scanned the empty booths. DeAndre was sitting in the farthest corner facing the front entrance. He wore a dark wool coat and a plain baseball cap pulled low over his intelligent eyes. I slid into the worn vinyl booth across from him. We did not exchange any pleasantries. The intense gravity of our meeting hung heavily in the stale diner air. I successfully decrypted the hidden drive. I whispered softly across the scratched table. He has been laundering millions of dollars from his corporate clients straight into the Cayman Islands. DeAndre nodded slowly, his expression perfectly stoic, but his eyes betraying a deep, fiery anger. I suspected he was funneling cash from his firm, DeAndre replied smoothly. Brittany has been spending money like it grows on trees, and her trust fund distributions never matched her lavish lifestyle. Donovan has been feeding her stolen cash to keep her quiet and loyal. But I needed you to track the exact numerical flow. You found the smoking gun, Cassidy. I slid my hands across the sticky table. I have the destination accounts and the fake vendor invoices, I explained urgently. But I need to tie the execution of those wire transfers directly to Donovan. His defense attorney will inevitably claim that the firm partners authorized the payments or that his computer was hijacked by an anonymous hacker. I need to eliminate his plausible deniability right now. DeAndre reached into his heavy coat. He pulled out a thick manila envelope and placed it firmly on the table between us. I built the entire network architecture for his home office, DeAndre stated with quiet authority. Donovan insisted on having a highly secure remote connection to his law firm so he could work late nights. He thought my security protocols were just to keep outside hackers away. He never realized those same protocols meticulously log every single keystroke and network request generated from inside the house. I opened the heavy envelope. Inside was a stack of highly detailed technical printouts. DeAndre pointed a long finger at the top page. Those are the Internet Protocol logs, he explained precisely. They trace the exact media access control address of the personal laptop Donovan uses exclusively. I isolated the exact timestamps of the wire transfers you texted me earlier. The logs show definitively that Donovan bypassed his own virtual private network to authorize the Cayman Island deposits. Furthermore, the geolocation data places his laptop exactly at his home office desk during every single fraudulent transaction. I stared at the pages in absolute awe. The data was beautifully organized and undeniably lethal. You completely trapped him in his own house, I said, looking up at my brother-in-law with profound respect. DeAndre leaned back against the vinyl seat. He crossed his arms over his chest. I am a father, he said, his voice dropping to a fierce, protective whisper. I refuse to let my children grow up in a family poisoned by extreme greed and massive federal crimes. Donovan and Beatrice treat everyone like disposable pawns. They think their wealth makes them entirely untouchable. Tonight we proved them completely wrong. I placed the technical logs into my dark briefcase. The trap was finally and fully locked. Donovan had no way to escape federal prison. I thanked DeAndre and returned to my apartment feeling entirely invincible. The crucial courtroom showdown was imminent. I possessed the exact ammunition to destroy my arrogant husband flawlessly. The morning sun rose over the Manhattan skyline, casting a brilliant golden light through the thin blinds of my temporary apartment. I did not feel any fatigue despite the late-night meeting at the diner. The technical logs resting safely inside my dark briefcase fueled me with an incredible surge of pure energy. I dressed with meticulous care, selecting a sharp charcoal suit that projected absolute authority. This was not the attire of a defeated housewife begging for scraps. This was the armor of a highly skilled forensic accountant preparing to execute a flawless professional takedown. I grabbed my briefcase, ensuring the heavy manila envelope and the encrypted hard drives were securely locked inside. I walked out of the apartment building and hailed a taxi, feeling entirely ready to face the brutal legal battlefield. The courthouse hallways were just as chaotic as they had been 2 days prior, but my internal landscape was entirely different now. I walked with a steady, commanding rhythm. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the courtroom and took my seat at the petitioner table. The room was mostly empty, the quiet atmosphere standing in stark contrast to the explosive confrontation I knew was rapidly approaching. I arranged my documents methodically across the polished wood surface. The trap was perfectly set. I simply needed to wait for my arrogant husband to willingly walk right into it. 10 minutes later, the courtroom doors swung open with aggressive force. Donovan strode down the center aisle, exuding absolute unchecked arrogance. He wore a brand new navy blue suit, his posture completely rigid with manufactured confidence. He expected to find an empty table. He truly believed his malicious police report and Vanessa's vicious threats had successfully driven me into hiding. When his dark eyes locked onto me sitting calmly at the petitioner table, his confident stride faltered for a fraction of a second. A brief flash of sheer confusion crossed his face before he quickly masked it with a deep, menacing scowl. He marched over to the defense table, leaning heavily against the wood to glare directly at me. "You are making a massive mistake showing your face here today," Donovan hissed across the small gap separating our tables. His voice was a low, threatening whisper designed to intimidate. "The police are actively building a criminal case against you for corporate espionage. You should have taken my extremely generous settlement and vanished while you still had the chance. Now I am going to make sure the judge strips you of absolutely everything. You will leave this courtroom with nothing but a pair of handcuffs." I did not flinch. I did not look away. I simply offered him a cold, completely unbothered smile. "You have always been terribly overconfident, Donovan," I replied smoothly. "It is a fatal flaw that makes you incredibly blind to your own massive vulnerabilities." Before he could unleash another string of toxic threats, the heavy side door opened. Judge Patricia Bennett entered the courtroom, her expression severely stern. She struck her wooden gavel demanding immediate order. The room fell entirely silent. "We are reconvening to address the emergency financial freeze placed on the accounts of Mr. Sterling," Judge Bennett announced sharply. She adjusted her glasses and looked directly at the defense table. "I expect a thorough explanation regarding the hidden assets discovered during our last session. Have your financial disclosures been fully updated, or are we proceeding with a contempt charge today?" Richard Campbell, Donovan's highly paid defense attorney, immediately leaped to his feet. He aggressively smoothed his silk tie, attempting to project righteous indignation. "Your Honor, my client has been the victim of a malicious and entirely illegal attack by the petitioner," Richard declared loudly. "We are not here to discuss updated financial disclosures. We are here to formally demand that Mrs. Sterling be held in immediate contempt of court for severe corporate theft and blatant industrial espionage." Judge Bennett narrowed her eyes, clearly annoyed by the sudden pivot. "Explain yourself, Mr. Campbell," she commanded coldly. Richard gestured wildly toward my side of the room. "Following our last hearing, the petitioner unlawfully accessed my client and his secure home office. She stole highly confidential proprietary client files belonging to his elite corporate law firm. She is utilizing stolen intellectual property to manufacture a completely fraudulent financial narrative. We have already filed a formal police report regarding her criminal actions. We firmly request that this court issue a default judgment in favor of my client immediately. We demand that Mrs. Sterling be stripped of all claims to the marital estate due to her egregious criminal conduct. Donovan sat back in his leather chair, crossing his arms over his chest with a deeply satisfied smirk. He looked at me with triumphant glee, fully believing his aggressive legal maneuver had successfully trapped me. He thought the mere mention of a police report would instantly turn the judge against me. He assumed his high-priced lawyer could easily bully the court into dismissing my forensic evidence entirely. Judge Bennett listened to the aggressive demands with a perfectly neutral expression. She did not immediately strike her gavel. She did not order the bailiffs to place me in handcuffs. Instead, she slowly turned her piercing gaze toward the petitioner table. The heavy silence in the courtroom felt incredibly thick and suffocating. The judge rested her hands on the high wooden bench, looking down at me with intense scrutiny. Mrs. Sterling, Judge Bennett stated, her voice carrying a heavy, authoritative weight. Your husband and his legal counsel are making exceptionally severe accusations against your character and your methods. They are requesting a default judgment that would completely obliterate your financial future. I am giving you one final chance to respond to these serious claims before I make my ruling. Do you have anything to say in your defense today? I slowly stood up. I picked up the heavy manila envelope containing the lethal internet protocol logs. My moment had finally arrived. I held the heavy manila envelope tightly in my hands. The rough paper felt like the ultimate symbol of justice against my palms. Donovan sneered at me from across the polished wooden table. He adjusted his expensive silk tie and leaned back in his luxurious leather chair. He fully expected me to burst into tears. He wanted me to beg the judge for mercy. He wanted me to hand over the financial files so his high-priced defense attorney could bury them in endless procedural objections. Richard Campbell stood up again and opened his mouth to launch another aggressive legal threat against my character. I did not even look at him. I did not address my arrogant husband. I did not address his loud lawyer. I did not even address Judge Patricia Bennett sitting high up on her distinguished wooden bench. Instead, I slowly turned my entire body away from the front of the imposing courtroom. I shifted my gaze directly toward the heavy double oak doors at the very back of the long center aisle. The silence in the large room was absolute and incredibly suffocating. Everyone stared at me in complete confusion. Beatrice leaned forward in the public gallery, her face twisting into a nasty scowl of pure bewilderment. Brittany gripped her designer handbag, looking annoyed by my dramatic pause. Donovan let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed loudly across the high ceiling. What exactly are you doing, Cassidy? My husband taunted with supreme confidence. Are you waiting for a miracle to walk through those doors and save your pathetic life today? I offered him a cold, completely unbothered smile. I am not waiting for a miracle, Donovan, I replied with crystal clear precision. I am waiting for the consequences of your massive greed. Right on cue, the heavy oak doors swung open with a massive, resounding crash. The loud noise startled every single person in the courtroom. Donovan whipped his head around, his smug smirk instantly freezing on his face. Richard Campbell dropped his legal notepad onto the floor. Beatrice gasped loudly, her hands flying up to clutch her expensive pearl necklace. Professor Winston Caldwell stepped through the doorway. He did not look like the frail, elderly passenger I had saved on the airplane. He did not look like a retired academic dropping by to watch a simple divorce proceeding. He looked like an absolute force of unstoppable nature. He walked down the center aisle with a commanding, terrifyingly steady stride. Pinned prominently to the lapel of his immaculate dark suit was his official gold and navy badge. It clearly identified him as the supreme chairman of the State Bar Ethics Committee. But Winston did not arrive alone today. Flanking him on either side were two tall, broad-shouldered men wearing crisp, dark plainclothes suits. Their posture was incredibly rigid and highly alert. They moved with the unmistakable coordinated precision of federal law enforcement. Small golden shields flashed briefly from their belts as their suit jackets swayed with each deliberate step. They were special agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The transformation of my husband was absolutely breathtaking to witness. The smug, untouchable smirk that Donovan had worn for the past 5 years completely disintegrated into a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. The color drained from his face so rapidly that his skin turned an alarming shade of chalky gray. His jaw dropped open, but no sound managed to escape his throat. His knees shook violently beneath the table. He recognized the chairman of the ethics committee immediately, and he recognized the severe federal agents walking right beside him. Judge Patricia Bennett stood up behind her high bench. She did not strike her wooden gavel or demand order. She simply watched the three powerful men approach the front of her courtroom with profound respect. Winston stopped right next to the petitioner table where I was standing. The two federal agents took strategic positions directly behind the defense table, completely blocking any possible exit path for my husband. "Good morning, Your Honor," Winston announced. His voice was a deep, resonant baritone that commanded total obedience. "I apologize for interrupting your family court proceedings today. However, the State Bar Ethics Committee and the Federal Bureau of Investigation have a highly urgent matter regarding the defendant sitting in your courtroom." Richard Campbell started to visibly sweat. The slick defense attorney instinctively took 2 large steps away from Donovan, desperately trying to distance his own professional reputation from his suddenly radioactive client. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard stammered weakly. "My client is simply finalizing a standard marital dissolution." Winston turned his piercing, icy gaze toward Donovan. "Your client is doing absolutely no such thing, Mr. Campbell," Winston stated fiercely. "Your client is actively utilizing this prestigious courtroom to finalize a massive federal crime." Winston looked at me and extended his hand. I did not hesitate for a single second. I handed the heavy manila envelope directly to the chairman. Inside this envelope are the fully authenticated Internet Protocol logs provided by a highly skilled cybersecurity architect, I declared loudly for the entire courtroom to hear. These logs contain irrefutable technical data. They prove exactly how Donovan bypassed his own corporate virtual private network to actively launder stolen money. I stood perfectly still as absolute panic consumed the entire courtroom. The atmosphere had completely shifted from a routine divorce proceeding into an explosive federal takedown. I reached into my leather briefcase one final time. I pulled out 3 sleek silver flash drives. I handed the first drive directly to Judge Patricia Bennett. I handed the second drive to Professor Winston Caldwell. I kept the third drive securely in my own hand. These drives contained the completely decrypted master ledgers for a Cayman Island shell company known as Apex Holdings, I announced clearly, my voice slicing through the heavy silence. They hold the precise financial mapping of an elaborate corporate embezzlement scheme orchestrated entirely by my husband. Richard Campbell practically threw his hands up in the air and physically backed away from the defense table. He was completely abandoning his arrogant client. "Your Honor, I had absolutely no prior knowledge of these criminal activities," Richard sputtered frantically. "I am officially requesting to withdraw as counsel for Mr. Sterling immediately." Judge Bennett did not even acknowledge his cowardly retreat. Her sharp eyes were completely locked onto the silver flash drive, resting on her high wooden bench. Donovan was hyperventilating now, his chest heaving, as he stared wildly at the 2 federal agents blocking his escape. I turned my body slightly, so I could address both the judge and the chairman of the ethics committee simultaneously. I spoke with absolute lethal precision. "Donovan did not just steal marital assets from our joint accounts," I explained methodically. "He actively utilized his position as a senior associate to systematically overbill his most powerful Fortune 500 corporate clients. He created an elaborate network of entirely fake vendors, specifically targeting his highly celebrated telecommunications acquisitions. He funneled millions of excess dollars through these fraudulent vendors, laundered the stolen cash through secondary domestic holding companies, and wired the massive illegal profits directly into his offshore vaults." Beatrice let out a loud, strangled gasp from the public gallery. Her perfectly manicured hands flew up to cover her mouth in sheer horror. She finally realized her golden son was not a brilliant corporate attorney. He was a massive federal criminal. Brittany slumped back into her wooden pew, staring at her brother with complete disbelief. The luxurious lifestyle she had enjoyed was entirely funded by severe financial fraud. My husband thought he was the smartest person in the room, I continued smoothly. He arrogantly bragged that he built financial labyrinths that federal regulators could never untangle. He genuinely believed his status made him completely untouchable. But he made a massive, arrogant mistake. He forgot that before I married him, I was a highly decorated forensic accountant. He gave me the password to his secure home network when he demanded I manage his domestic affairs. And last night, thanks to a deeply concerned family member who actually understands cybersecurity, I isolated the exact internet protocol logs, tying Donovan and his personal laptop directly to every single illegal Cayman Island wire transfer. Donovan let out a pathetic whimper. His eyes darted frantically around the courtroom, desperately searching for any possible exit. But the two federal agents remained completely still, their posture rigid and intensely intimidating. "You cannot prove anything." Donovan choked out, his voice cracking with pure terror. "You are making wild accusations. You stole my files and fabricated this entire ridiculous narrative." I smiled coldly. "I anticipated your desperate denial, Donovan. Arrogant men always assume they can simply lie their way out of a trap." I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my cellular phone. I tapped the screen and opened my voice memo application. "However, your own mistress was significantly less careful than you were. She visited my apartment yesterday morning specifically to gloat about your hidden wealth." I held the phone up so the speaker faced the center of the courtroom. I pressed the play button. The silence in the room was absolute, as Vanessa and her high-pitched, intensely arrogant voice echoed clearly across the high ceiling. "Donovan already moved the real money to Apex Holdings in the Caymans. You are getting arrested and I am getting the Hamptons house. Just plead guilty, sweetheart. It will save us all a lot of unnecessary paperwork." Vanessa let out a sharp, terrified scream from the back of the gallery. She jumped up from her seat and sprinted toward the heavy oak doors, desperately trying to escape the massive federal fallout. But the doors were heavily guarded by court bailiffs. She was completely trapped. Donovan stared at the phone in my hand with absolute, unadulterated horror. His mistress had just handed me the exact audio confession needed to completely destroy his entire criminal defense. "You pathetic, stupid girl!" Donovan suddenly roared, his terror instantly transforming into blinding, violently explosive rage. He completely snapped. The sophisticated corporate lawyer persona entirely evaporated, leaving behind a vicious, desperate monster. He lunged across the wide wooden defense table, his arms outstretched as he launched his entire body directly toward me. "You ruined everything," he screamed furiously, his face twisted into a mask of pure, uncontrollable hatred. I did not flinch or step backward. Before Donovan could even clear the heavy wooden table, the two federal agents moved with terrifying, instantaneous speed. They grabbed his expensive suit jacket mid-air and slammed his body forcefully down onto the hard mahogany surface. The loud, violent crash echoed like a gunshot through the courtroom. Donovan thrashed wildly, screaming obscenities and cursing my name, but the agents pinned him down effortlessly. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists signaled the absolute end of his arrogant reign. He was completely restrained, his face pressed painfully against the polished wood of his own defense table. He was no longer a powerful senior associate on the verge of making managing partner. He was just a pathetic, broken criminal waiting to be hauled away to federal prison. The ultimate forensic takedown was entirely complete, and my absolute victory was utterly flawless today. The heavy steel handcuffs clicked shut around the wrists of my husband with a sharp, echoing finality. Donovan remained pinned against the polished mahogany of his own defense table, his cheek pressed firmly into the wood. His chest heaved with frantic, ragged breaths as the two federal agents held him effortlessly in place. The entire courtroom watched in absolute stunned silence. The sheer violence of his outburst had evaporated the very second the cold metal secured his hands behind his back. The arrogant corporate lawyer who expected an easy victory was gone. He finally realized his massive web of deception had completely collapsed. I stood tall at the petitioner table, smoothing the lapels of my dark charcoal suit. I felt an incredible surge of power watching him struggle against the inescapable reality of his situation. Beatrice sat frozen in the public gallery, her face buried in her hands, as she quietly sobbed. Her perfect high society reputation was officially destroyed. Brittany stared at her brother in sheer horror, her dreams of endless trust fund payouts permanently shattered. Near the back doors, the court bailiffs maintained a firm grip on Vanessa, ensuring the panicked mistress could not escape before investigators questioned her. Judge Patricia Bennett slowly lowered her wooden gavel, though she did not need to strike it. She looked down at the disgraced lawyer with an expression of profound, unadulterated disgust. Mr. Sterling, Judge Bennett stated, her voice slicing through the heavy silence of the room. I have witnessed many attempts to hide marital assets during my career on the bench. I have never witnessed a licensed attorney utilize a family court proceeding to actively cover up a massive international money laundering conspiracy. Your behavior today is not just an insult to your wife. It is an egregious insult to the entire judicial system. I am formally striking your fraudulent prenuptial agreement from the public record immediately. I am also granting full control of the frozen domestic accounts to Mrs. Sterling pending the federal investigation. Donovan groaned, a pathetic sound of total defeat. The federal agent slowly pulled him up from the table, forcing him to stand on his own 2 feet. His expensive navy blue suit was heavily wrinkled. He refused to look at the judge, keeping his eyes firmly fixed on the marble floor. Professor Winston Caldwell stepped closer to the defense table. He adjusted his suit jacket, his gold and Navy Ethics Committee badge gleaming brightly under the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom. He looked at Donovan not as a former student, but as a severe disappointment to the entire legal profession. When you sat in my classroom 12 years ago, you believed that the law was simply a tool to be manipulated for personal gain. Winston began, his deep baritone voice echoing with absolute authority. You believed that rules only applied to those who lacked the intelligence to bypass them. You thought you could outsmart your colleagues, outsmart your clients, and outsmart the very woman who sacrificed everything to support your early career. You were entirely wrong. Winston held up the silver flash drive I had handed him moments earlier. Based on the overwhelming forensic evidence provided today and your own violent conduct in this courtroom, I am exercising my emergency executive authority, Winston declared firmly. Donovan Sterling, your license to practice law in this state is hereby suspended effective immediately. The Ethics Committee will convene tomorrow morning to formalize your permanent and irrevocable disbarment. You will never set foot inside a courtroom as an attorney again. The finality of the disbarment hit Donovan like a physical blow. His knees wobbled and he leaned heavily against the defense table to keep himself from collapsing. His legal career, the only thing he truly valued in his entire life, was dead. The taller FBI agent stepped forward, tightening his grip on the arm of my husband. Donovan Sterling, the agent announced, his voice devoid of any emotion. You are under arrest for severe violations of federal law. You are being charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, massive corporate embezzlement, and international money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The Miranda warning shattered the final remnants of his arrogant facade. The reality of a federal prison sentence finally penetrated his thick skull. Donovan completely broke down. Tears streamed rapidly down his pale cheeks. His chest hitched as loud, ugly sobs tore from his throat. The man who had mocked my cheap blazer and threatened to leave me completely homeless was now crying like a terrified child. He suddenly threw his weight forward, breaking free from the agent for a second. Instead, he dropped heavily to his knees right in front of the petitioner table. The heavy chains on his wrists clattered loudly. He looked up at me, his face red and slick with tears. "Cassidy, please," Donovan begged, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. "You have to tell them this is a massive mistake. You can fix this. You know how to fix the ledgers. I will give you everything. I will give you the Cayman accounts, the Hamptons house, every single dollar I ever made. Just tell the agents to let me go. I am so sorry. I was stupid. Please do not let them take me to federal prison." I looked down at the pathetic man kneeling on the hard marble floor. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel any lingering affection. I only felt the pure, unadulterated satisfaction of a flawlessly executed forensic takedown. I reached up and carefully smoothed the collar of my charcoal blazer, ensuring my posture remained perfectly straight and completely untouchable. "You told me my 5 years of loyalty were legally worth $0, I replied, my voice echoing with icy calculated precision across the silent courtroom. "Well, Donovan, 15 years in federal prison is completely free." The immediate aftermath of that explosive courtroom confrontation set a chain reaction that completely decimated the Sterling family empire. Fast forward exactly 1 year. The brutal justice delivered that morning was only the beginning of their absolute destruction. Donovan did not get 15 years. The federal prosecutors, armed with the digital dossier I provided, dismantled his entire defense strategy within a matter of mere weeks, and ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple federal counts of wire fraud, international money laundering, and corporate embezzlement to avoid a humiliating public trial. The judge sentenced him to 20 hard years in a maximum security penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. His legal career is permanently dead, buried beneath the staggering weight of his own monumental greed. He now spends his days wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, permanently stripped of his expensive Italian suits and manufactured corporate superiority. The devastating financial fallout from his criminal enterprise rapidly consumed the rest of his toxic family. Beatrice quickly learned the harsh reality of living entirely on stolen wealth. Once investigators fully traced the dark origins of their family trust, the Internal Revenue Service moved with absolute precision. They seized the massive upstate New York estate, where I had endured that horrific psychological ambush. Beatrice was forcefully evicted from her historic mansion. The federal government auctioned off her antique wooden furniture, her gleaming crystal chandeliers, and every single piece of her precious jewelry to pay back the defrauded clients. She now resides alone in a tiny apartment on the gritty outskirts of the city, completely ostracized from her elite social circles. Her faux snobbery vanished into thin air the second her bank accounts were permanently frozen. She finally understands what it feels like to possess absolutely nothing. Brittany suffered an equally catastrophic and humiliating downfall. The federal investigation revealed that she had knowingly accepted stolen corporate funds to maintain her incredibly lavish lifestyle. While she narrowly avoided serving federal prison time by fully cooperating with authorities, the massive scandal completely destroyed her marriage. DeAndre filed for an immediate, uncompromising divorce. The family court judge, thoroughly disgusted by her blatant financial complicity and toxic behavior, swiftly granted DeAndre full and sole legal custody of their beautiful children. Brittany was left with absolutely nothing to her name. She lost her sparkling diamond necklaces, her massive trust fund, and her entire family in one swift stroke of absolute justice. She is currently working a minimum wage retail job, forced to finally earn an honest paycheck just to survive the harsh reality of her new impoverished existence. While the Sterling family crumbled into absolute financial ruin, my own life transformed into something brilliantly spectacular. The Securities and Exchange Commission thoroughly reviewed the massive offshore ledger I had painstakingly decrypted. Because my forensic accounting work directly exposed an ongoing corporate fraud ring, the federal government officially classified me as a highly protected corporate whistleblower. Under federal law, I was legally entitled to a substantial predetermined percentage of the recovered stolen funds. The SEC ultimately awarded me a massive whistleblower bounty that instantly secured my absolute financial independence for the rest of my natural life. Combined with the full legal recovery of my rightful marital assets and the significant punitive damages awarded by the divorce court, I possess the exact liquid capital required to fully reclaim my professional destiny. I did not just return to the workforce, I actively decided to completely dominate it. Today, exactly 1 year after confidently walking out of that courthouse, I stood in the center of a stunning corner office in Midtown Manhattan. The expansive floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the iconic New York City skyline. The morning sun gleamed brightly against the towering glass skyscrapers. I reached forward with a pair of sharp silver scissors and smoothly cut the thick red ribbon draped across the main glass entrance. A large crowd of distinguished professional colleagues and powerful corporate clients erupted into enthusiastic ringing applause. I had officially opened the doors to my very own elite forensic accounting firm. My new agency specializes exclusively in untangling the most complex financial frauds hidden deep within the modern corporate world. We expose the arrogant men who believe they are entirely untouchable. We bring hidden truths directly into the blinding light of day. I smiled warmly at the crowd, feeling an incredible surge of pure, unadulterated professional pride. The applause echoed loudly. The heavy glass. Double doors swung open gracefully, and a tall, familiar figure walked confidently into the bright reception area. DeAndre smiled warmly, his dark, intelligent eyes radiating genuine pride and absolute professional respect. He was no longer just my quiet, observant former brother-in-law. I had officially hired him as the head of cybersecurity and my primary senior partner. We had completely joined our exceptional skills. We made an incredibly lethal, technologically unstoppable team. He shook my hand firmly, congratulating me on the flawless launch of our highly anticipated corporate endeavor today. A courier suddenly stepped off the private elevator and handed my receptionist a massive, elegant arrangement of pristine white orchids. I walked over and gently opened the small, crisp white envelope, resting carefully among the beautiful blooming flowers. The handwritten note inside contained only 4 simple, deeply respectful words. To a brilliant mind. It was signed by Winston. Professor Caldwell had faithfully kept his silent promise, quietly watching my professional career soar from afar. The legendary legal scholar had witnessed my absolute triumph over his most arrogant, corrupt former student. I placed the beautiful orchids directly on my sleek mahogany desk. I walked over to the massive window and looked out at the sprawling, vibrant city below. The toxic shadows of my past were permanently erased. The arrogant men who tried to destroy me were locked away or broken. I took a deep, refreshing breath of the crisp, air-conditioned office air. My forensic accounting firm was officially open for business, and my real, authentic life had finally begun.